So welcome to the final seminar of the year, and I'm really pleased to welcome Philip Kirk, who is Director and Archivist at the Bus Archive. And Philip is going to say a few words, first of all, by way of introduction. So I'll leave it at that and hand over to you, Philip. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Let me try to do the technical parts of it now. Right. I'm now hoping that everyone is seeing what I'm seeing. Is that right?
That's great, yeah.
Excellent, okay. Right, well, thank you very much for the invitation. It's been a long time in the planning, because I think Tamara asked me to do this about March last year, but obviously things got in the way. It's great to be able to come along and tell you about the Bus Archive, about something about our own history, how we got to where we are, and some highlights from the collection, insights to what that might bring, and some glimpses into the future as well. So start off with this photograph. This was taken by a chap called Charles Clapper, who was a transport journalist, and this was taken just after the war. Lots of uniforms around, but it is after the war because there are no headlight masks on the vehicle. So I just get this out of the way. I won't be showing a lot of bus photographs, which may well annoy at least half of the audience. But I just thought I would start with this, as it illustrates the bus, not just as a bus, but actually serving the community. And this is taken somewhere in Derbyshire. I have to confess to not being a career archivist. I had a 35-year career in the bus industry. And that culminated in 20 years here in the city of Oxford, latterly as managing director for 13 of those years. But about 10 years ago, I thought, right, I've had enough of this, and I want to do something else. And so I decided to become an archivist and took the master's course in archives management. And this is about where we are at the moment. So the Bus Archive was created about 3 years ago now, and individuals from the bus industry and from the enthusiast movement came together in the knowledge that there was a bit of what you might call a gap in the market, that tramways were very well served with what was going on at Crouch. We had the National Railway Museum in York, and of course TfL and the London Transport Museum in the capital. But there was no recognised archive anywhere for the provincial UK. There were lots of archives attached to particular enthusiast groups, and lots of archives lying deep within buildings of bus companies. But we thought there was a bit of a gap to create the Bus Archive to be that kind of recognised facility. So our history is that the practical things we did was brought together two of the largest archives that were existing. One, the Kithead Trust, which had taken in the records of the National Bus Company when its subsidiaries were privatised in the 1980s. Basically, these are the records that were offered to what was then the Public Record Office, but were turned down. And some far-sighted people actually within the National Bus Company said, well, we can't just destroy all these records, which were not just for the National Bus Company period, but went right back to the start of the subsidiaries in the Victorian times. And it was placed with something called the Kithead Trust. We'll come back to the choice of names in a second. So that really was the core collection for Kithead. It was supplemented by the collection of the Birmingham Transport Historic Society. And then in the late 90s, we were gifted the Department for Transport's library. If we can think back that far, when the Labour Party came to government and this large department was created for John Prescott of Environment, Transport and the Regions, essentially that was environment taking over transport. And we were gifted the Department for Transport's historic library. The other strand came from the Omnibus Society and their library and archive, and that had a completely different history. That was started in 1942 by a number of members who were going off to war and decided to pool their collections of publicity largely. And that has grown and grown tremendously since then. Indeed, it got to such a size that it almost subsumed the whole of the society. And that was quite a few years ago recognised by the British Library as being a collection of significance. So our business model essentially was this, that the Omnibus Society Library and Archive and the Kithead Trust would come together to form the bus archive, and that would work with the bus industry, with the professional archive sector, and be available for research and education. We thought long and hard before we set off as to what's in a name. The Kithead Trust name particularly was troublesome because the first 20 minutes of any discussion I had was, what is Kithead and what's that supposed to be? And the answer to that is it's actually an off-the-shelf company that nobody thought in all the years to actually change the name. Plus the Omnibus Society Library and Archive is a bit cumbersome, a little bit old-fashioned. And we had a bit of an internal competition as to what our new archive should be. And we had some very, very lengthy and descriptive titles, such as the British Isles Bus Archive and Library, the Bus, Coach, Tram and Trolleybus Archive and Library. But we felt on balance that these were just a little bit too cumbersome. And what we decided on was a very, very simple title, the Bus Archive, with the strapline, the memory of the bus industry. And that's actually, we feel, been very instrumental in the success we've had, because whilst it doesn't cover everything we do in great detail, it gives a flavour of what we do and can be communicated very, very easily. There was a little bit of criticism that we hadn't chosen a vintage bus as our logo, but we decided that we didn't want that because the Bus Archive really does say what we do. And that could be an open door, it could be a low acid box being opened and revealing its secrets. And we just felt that we needed something abstract. In this and all design matters, we've actually been very fortunate to have with us someone called Ray Stenning, who is one of the designers that works with the bus and indeed the transport industries on livery designs, and he's one of the leading exponents, and we're very, very pleased to have actually had him with us. So having chosen a very, very simple title, our mission statement, because we have to have one, we felt had to be a little bit more wordy, but every word had to really count. So we collect and preserve records, photographs, publications, and publicity for the road passenger transport industries, bus, coach, trolleybus, and tram, and make these freely available to the public for research and education. So there we are within a sentence, albeit a fairly lengthy sentence. That in a nutshell is actually what we do. So the bringing together of these collections actually gave us a new beginning. The two collections were actually kept 30 miles apart in the West Midlands. And although they were the largest of the archives then existing, it was almost never the twain shall meet. We even had the situation with a run of directors' meeting minutes where volumes 1, 3 and 5 were in one repository and 2, 4 and 6 were in the other repository. And at that stage, never the twain shall meet. So this was a real opportunity to bring together these collections, to get rid of the overlap, because there was quite a bit of that, and to provide professional standards, first of all. And in the medium term, our aim is to get accreditation from the National Archive. The reason why we haven't done more towards accreditation so far is, first of all, we're very, very large. So for National Archives accreditation, I think the line for being a large archive is 100 cubic meters, and we're already nearly 6 times as large as something you could call a large archive. So we're playing 25 years of catch up on a very, very large amount of material. And we wanted to make the collections more accessible and better known, and we'll come on to how we might have done that. But what slightly took us by surprise is there have been an absolute huge response from both the enthusiast community and the bus industry itself. The bus industry itself has said, wow, why did we never think of this before? And there's been a great response from them, and surprisingly from the enthusiast community, whom we thought knew everything that was held by both of the repositories. We could offer nothing new. So the professional standards that we are now applying is climate control, humidity control, use of conservation standard materials, whether that's paper clips or pencils. We rely almost exclusively on volunteer labour, and I am the only trained archivist in the organisation. So I am quite widely stretched, giving advice. Because we took over these 2 community archives, there were embedded practices that were not the best. So certainly in one location, everybody thought it was great to have a cup of coffee while dealing with items in the collection. I can just feel the hairs on everyone's neck rising as I say this. So food and drink has been banned. We've had to stop people from actually working in the storage rooms. And that's been a little bit of a lesson all around, really. But we are satisfied that what we're doing now is actually a lot better than that which we inherited. So this is the type of thing we inherited. Typically, lots of things were shelved, some were boxed, but everything was in the Tesco's boxes that it came in the first place. If you can still see the illustration on the right, in some cases, the boxes themselves were collapsing. And there was absolutely nothing being done on cataloguing. So anything that we had in any of the collections were basically in the heads of a small number of people in their 70s. So what we've been doing in the last few years is low acid boxes. We've probably kept Rider Box in profitability for the last 3 years. Those boxes on the top left, those were our first 13 boxes that we had material in. And we're now up to box number 11,000. And you can see on the right, that's typically what our shelving now looks like. Anything that is in a box has been catalogued. And you can see bottom left, that's one of the volunteers' work that we are cataloguing. We're cataloguing to ISAD G standards. First of all, just the essential elements of ISAD G. And we're doing ISAD G because, of course, that's the recognized archival standard. And we aren't going to be doing this twice. We've already got about 55,000 items catalogued. So we're actually going at quite a rate. These are a snapshot of our volunteers. This was taken pre-COVID, before anyone panics at that photograph. It seems quite strange now to have people in quite close proximity to each other. But these are the chaps who are going through the existing files, cataloguing them, boxing them up, putting them in acid-free folders and in the low acid boxes. And it took us a little while to get going, but my goodness, these chaps are very thorough and they're very dedicated, and actually coming into our 3 centres now, we have between about 25 and 30 volunteers. And we have remote volunteers who do other things like cataloguing, scanned photographs. So all in all, we have about 90 volunteers, and that's been really remarkable. In the last 5 years, we've gone from 4 or 5 volunteers to that number of people who have seen what we're doing, are interested in what we're doing, and we've been able to train up and get some really good results from them. So that side of things is going really well. The response from the industry, as I said, has been very, very good. These are 2 shots that we took in the loft of a bus garage in Anlaby Road in Hull. East Yorkshire Motor Services was owned by an individual, Peter Shipp, who'd bought it from the National Bus Company, and he was almost the last man standing, who still owned the same company from NBC privatisation. He sold the company on to the Go Ahead Group about 2 years ago, and both Peter Shipp and the Go Ahead Group then contacted us and said, right, there is some material in the loft in Hull. So we went up there. Any illumination that you see is a torch. And there were not 1 but 4 lofts, and 3 of us spent, I think, 3 or 4 days actually going through the loft, bringing down all the material, and then making an assessment as to what we wanted to take and what had to be destroyed, because there were things there like staff records that we wouldn't ordinarily take. It was very interesting because East Yorkshire Motor Services almost had thrown out nothing since its creation in 1926. And of course, from an archives point of view, that's absolute gold to be able to be given access to complete runs of documents and files and everything else. A lot of it is still waiting to be processed by us, because of course we can't, irrespective of how many volunteers we have, we just can't swallow this amount of material at once. But it is now safe. But they have discovered now a further loft, and we're going back to get that when conditions allow. And really, the industry attitude was typified. This is from Martin Gilbert, who is managing director of Go North East, which actually includes East Yorkshire now. And this is something that he put on Facebook. He popped over to our Chesley Street depot today for a quick meeting and unexpectedly found this treasure trove in a cupboard. I can feel a call to the bus archive coming on. So that is the gold standard. That is what we need from the industry, because every bus garage and every head office has its room of old stuff. And part of our message to the industry is, when you find that room of old stuff, don't ring the skip hire company, ring us. We can always assess what is there, and we can always throw out the things that are not required from an archival point of view. So that's going pretty well. My car isn't always as stacked as this. This is me just getting ready for another pickup. And it's amazing, because we are called the Bus Archive. If someone has some material to dispose of, and they now go on Google, we are one of the first that actually pops up. And so basically what we say to potential donors is, yes, we're happy to take anything as a donation, but ownership must come to us. We don't take anything on loan. And if we don't have any particular items such as publicity, those will be added to our collection. But if we do already have an item, then we will pull out the item in worse condition and sell that to the financial benefit of our charity. And sales of duplicate material is absolutely roaring away at the moment. Last year, our revenue for that was £82,000. And we have our one employee is employed for 12 hours a week doing eBay sales for us. So that's been very lucrative indeed. So what do we have? Obviously, being an archive, the real thing we have is an awful lot of records. These are just a couple of samples. On the left there, that's the Director's Minute Book number 1 for the Northern General Transport Company based in Gateshead. And that's the minute book from 1913. We have a full run of Director's Minute Books for that company and indeed for many companies. I think I checked, let me see, I just checked with our catalogue. And if you search for minute book, we have 234 minute books for companies. Now, some of those will be individual volumes in runs, but we think we have the core records for about 150 companies. On the right, that is something from East Yorkshire, and that is from the engineering department, a bulletin from 1938 as to the methodology of how you change a Leyland Tiger engine. So if anybody wants to know that, we're the people with the knowledge. So typically these are the types of records that we have for many, many bus companies. We've also got records for a number of vehicle manufacturers and for local authorities acting as transport coordinating bodies. So these are really comprehensive in some respects, but we are a collecting archive, and of course the way things come down to us has a randomization factor. So we don't have complete sets of records for all companies, but we can almost guarantee that we have some records for all bus companies. And these throw up a few surprises. On the left there is a Christmas card that was issued to employees of United Automobile Services in the northeast of England again by the general manager, Mr. A.T. Evans. And this was still in its envelope, addressed to a Miss Cleesby, who was a conductress, and it still had the 10-shilling note in the envelope. And I thought, my goodness, 10 shillings in 1954, we are rich, but it's about £14. So we're not rich. On the right, there is a booklet from British Electric Traction, one of the two large groups which were in existence up until the 1960s. And this is for an executive career in passenger road transport. But if you look inside, it actually said it's a training scheme for men. And this is as late as about 1965, we think. So a little bit of unwitting testimony there. This is an interesting one that we got from a private collection in Acton. These are London General buses from the Edwardian era. And just as petrol buses were getting underway, this was an investigation as to the best design of guardrail to have under these very high buses. And we've actually got an original engineering department memo from London General Omnibus Company from about 1913, we think. And this was a list of all the designs. And what they were doing is actually throwing dummies at the buses. And you can just see on the right, item 10, the guardrails that were invented by AEC ripped open the dummy. And number 11, again designed by AEC, ripped open the dummy, and it was noisy. So not only have we killed somebody, but we've made a noise doing it at the same time. So that's just a very interesting little snippet from there. A lot of enthusiast material. This is an enthusiast who stood at Crystal Palace on the 17th of May 1936 and recorded every trolleybus that came past. So this is a little bit of behind the scenes. So we quite like this because this is a snapshot of what was actually happening rather than the official picture that we would get from any minutes. Also at Acton, we have quite a full run of London Transport traffic circulars. This was a fortnightly publication that London Transport issued to its employees. And we have things like lost tickets and stand working and everything else. But again, a little bit of something from behind the scenes, which just adds colour to what was seen externally. And this is a London Transport advice book for the central area. And this is the allocation and reallocation of buses between depots. And we've got quite a long run of those as well. It can make for boring reading, but to paraphrase Miss Jean Brodie, for those who like this kind of thing, this is the kind of thing they like. This is a slightly off the wall one. What becomes clear is those people who were overseeing bus operations at a director level or a councillor level certainly did themselves proud up until the 1980s. We have some directors' visits brochures from the BET group again. And it's almost like the bus garages and the operations where they were visiting is a side issue from the very splendid lunches and dinners that we're having with specialist wine for each course. This is not quite so lavish. This is Liverpool City Transport, the annual inspection of the City Transport Committee, very grand, 19th of July 1967. And this is what the Liverpool City Transport Band were playing. Apart from the sound of music and the Dam Busters theme, there's nothing there that's after the 1950s. But 19th of July 1967 is the date that All You Need Is Love was at the top of the charts with the Beatles. And you would have thought that the Fab Four may have featured in Liverpool City Transport's repertoire, particularly as George Harrison's father was an ex-employee by that time, but sadly not. There we go. We've got lots of property files. So this, again, from the northeast of England, people would think that I have some kind of connection from there. I don't know. This is a file again from United Automobile Services, and it's a property file and a photograph of every garage they have and a plan of every garage. Plaxtons are still going today. They are one of the premier coach builders in the UK, and they've gone through several phases of ownership. And about 2002, they went bankrupt, and all the workforce in Scarborough was told to go home and not to come back again. But about half a dozen of the employees said, well, there is a room of old stuff. And they saved an enormous amount of archive material from Plaxtons. As it happened, there was a purchase, and Plaxtons, as I said, still survive today. But their archive is with us and now with their approval. And that's very interesting. We've got a full set of brochures. So this is from the 1930s. And we can see the gentle curve of the Art Deco period in their design. And then we reach the 1960s, and it's the space age. And that's what was happening in 1961. Plaxtons never actually made a coach that looked anything remotely like that, but I think on their brochures they had to exaggerate a little. And we have the full set of their official photographs. In 1951, I mean, look at all that marvelous woodwork in 1951. So this is not the 1930s anymore, but it looks like a 1930s design. All that wonderful design. And for an extra £5, you can have, as there is there, a coal effect fire at the front of your coach. So a few people obviously took that. Plaxtons in the 1980s decided that they couldn't keep all of their vehicle specification sheets, so they had them microfilmed. And of course, that in those days was the coming technology, but as we found, it was a dead end. So we inherited about 100 microfilms from Plaxton's. And of course, we had a reader, but the technology is bound to become obsolete at some stage. So we've actually bought a scanner which can automatically read and create PDFs of individual pages on a microfilm. So we now have something like 500,000 PDFs of these things. And one of the things we can now do is actually ship those out to remote volunteers. And we do have people who gladly sit there and sort through these and put them in order. Because the way they were microfilmed was absolutely bizarre. So we really need someone to put them back into original order. And we are actually achieving that now. We've also got a "There's Nothing New Under the Sun" section. This is a gas bus operating in Birmingham in the 1920s, proudly proclaiming this bus is running on the town's gas. Nothing ever came of it because in those days petrol and later diesel was always a lot cheaper than running on gas. And it's only in recent years that we've gone back to alternative fuels. This is an interesting one that we found just in a collection. I mean, one of the frustrations we have is that we don't always know where some of our material came from. This is an electric vehicle charging station map that we think is from the 1920s. And that seems to us amazing. But in all those towns, there is a charging station, which one assumes if you had an electric vehicle in those days, you could actually charge there. But you know, again, it seems remarkable that all those years ago, we were thinking about electric traction. This is an example of electric traction that was tried in 1973 in eastern counties in East Anglia. If it looks like a little bit like a milk float, that's exactly what it was based on. And it was tried for a little while, but then decided the technology wasn't ready, and that was the end of that. And of course, there have been successive trials of electric buses, not least in Oxford down the years, but it's interesting that that's always been played with. And perhaps now we're going to see the fruition of that in the 21st century. Anyone that's been anywhere near the bus industry or lots of other industries in recent years, no doubt has been hit over the head by key performance indicators. And if we think that's a new innovation, here is something again from London General Hammersmith Garage. And in 1916, it's key performance indicators about lost miles and accidents and which 6 cars are doing the best on petrol consumption and which the worst. So again, there's nothing new. Publicity, we have absolute rooms of timetables and publicity, and these are successfully now being catalogued. The completists amongst our volunteers are as enthusiastic as ever. When we get several boxes of timetables, I keep thinking, well, shouldn't we just assume that we have them all? But no, we've got to go through for the 2% that we haven't got. And these are just some of the examples, including fishing holidays in Southern Ireland in 1976, if that's your thing, or the more frugal 1935 timetable of the United Counties Express Coach Services. And this is a bit of a challenge for us that we'll come on to a little later, that bus companies, in my view, in a very short-sighted way, a lot of them are no longer issuing hard copy timetables, and they're issuing PDFs at best. So that's a bit of a challenge for us. Photographs. We think, because we haven't quite counted them all, but we think by the space they take up, we have 1.8 million photographs. And we are going through them. We've done a risk assessment on all the photographic images, and the ones which are most at risk are 1970s 35mm slides, because a lot of them are actually fading. So we've actually struck a commercial deal with an online transport photograph bureau that they are scanning them to our archival standards, and we then push those out again to remote volunteers who can catalogue them all. And just before lockdown, we had received 35,000 scans, and we kept a lot of people very, very happy in lockdown by giving them batches of 200 photographs, a spreadsheet template, and my goodness, they were glad of that. So that's actually coming along very well. We've got a lot of operators' own company photographs. This is Midland Red's first computer in 1970. We actually know the name of the lady, which I haven't made a note of, but I guess it won't make a lot of sense to us. And this is Midland Red's first computer, and those are punch cards that lady is putting in, and no doubt somebody will get paid at the end of that. But if you see the size of the computer, it's probably, you know, bigger than this archive, really. This is an interesting one. This is Lupus Street in London. And one of the most comprehensive collections we have is of London coastal coaches, which ran Victoria Coach Station. And this is the precursor to London Coach Station, Victoria Coach Station. This is Lupus Street in Pimlico. And we've been speaking to some people in TfL who are glad of this photograph, just to show what might happen if Victoria Coach Station was no longer there. So this is Lupus Street. This is the ground now occupied by Victoria Coach Station. This is when it had been acquired by London Coastal Coaches. I think this is about 1929, 1930. And then we can see the skeleton going up a Victoria Coach Station. Of course, designed by Wallace Gilbert and Partners, who went on to design the Hoover Building and much else. And this, I think, is one of my favourite photographs, because that's Victoria Coach Station in its original Art Deco glory. No one had messed around with it in those days. Nobody had clad it in things. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful building. It looks like it could do with a good clean, but there we are. And we have a full set of the construction and the opening of Victoria Coach Station, including it being blessed by the Bishop of London, if anybody's interested in that. This is a device for producing gas and running your wartime bus on gas. It looks a complete Heath Robinson contraption. This was devised by a company called Birch Brothers, who were based in Bedfordshire, obviously demonstrating that in wartime. If you've ever had a tour of the Cotswolds, this is Chipping Camden High Street in the late 1940s, which to me illustrates two things. One, that such a rudimentary type of bus could be running in the late 40s still. And certainly Chipping Camden High Street had not been hit by the tourist boom by that stage, because you wouldn't be able to stir in the current day along there. But that's an interesting one. And we get lots of things. That is Mr. Howells looking very proud on the front step of his brand new Bedford SB in 1953, and just a charming little slice of life there. One effect that we're getting is that a lot of people who that have held on to collections for many years are now coming forward and saying, wow, we've been waiting for you because we know you're permanent, we know you're running things on professional lines, so I can now give over my collection to you. And this is a collection of photographs by a chap called Tony Whitehead, who was the official photographer of the National Bus Company from its first day in 1969 to its final day in 1987. And he photographed everything. And this is an interesting one. This is the first purchase by Stagecoach of a National Bus Company company. And this, I understand, was a photo call that was very hastily called in Victoria Coach Station. And there is Anne Gloag at the front and her brother Brian Souter behind. And this is them really taking off. This was their first substantial purchase. And this is where Stagecoach really starts. And there's nothing like a bit of stereotyping. And because they're Scottish, they had to have a piper provided by the National Bus Company. And the chap who was holding the leak was a chap called Dawson Williams, who was the general manager for Hampshire Bus, not for much longer after this. And because he's Welsh, of course, he has to hold a leak. But what I found most interesting about this is the chap who's receiving the keys is actually the uncle of Brian Souter and Anne Gloag, a chap called Fraser McCall, who provided a lot of the initial backing. And he's almost been airbrushed out of the history now, as the history of Stagecoach has become more homespun over the years. That is slightly forgotten. So a little bit of bus industry history there. Publications, gosh, we have them all. PSV News, we have operator newsletters, we have manufacturers newsletters. We've probably got every book. We've got about 10,000 books on buses. So we've probably got a pretty comprehensive set. But we're more than just buses. Although we say we're the Bus Archive, and I've said that we deliberately chose a very simple name, through our holdings that we got from the Kithead Trust and the Department for Transport Library, we've actually kept the Kithead Transport Archive name going, and it's got its separate website, and that's for holdings other than bus industry holdings. So we actually do have a lot of railway material. So this was all held by the Department for Transport. So there's a copy of the Light Railways Act as it applied to the Crewe Light Railway and its application in 1896, I think. We have a full set of Turnpike Acts, bound magnificently. And you can just see on the bottom right, the stamp of the Department of Environment Library. That's obviously come the other way, and that's an act from the reign of George III. We've got all kinds of things. We have the Severn Barrage Committee report from 1933. You know, the Severn Barrage still hasn't been implemented, but this was a committee with a very, very strong view on things in those days. And we got odds and sods like people's driving licenses for a motor car. That's for Oldham, and that's signed by the Chief Constable. We've got a full range of TRL reports. We have a lot of last user records for motor taxation. When the DVLA was created in the 70s, all of the taxation authorities were asked to send their records into Swansea, and they were put on a computer, probably twice as big as the Midland Red computer. And then they were offered the records back as archives, and some local authorities took them back and some didn't. And some of those that didn't make it back, we have. So we've got about 2 million last user record cards. And we do have dispensation from DVLA that if any inquirers can confirm a chassis number and a vehicle registration, we can give them a letter that the DVLA will look on fondly about having that registration number and vehicle restored to the DVLA computer. So we get a trickle of enquiries rather than a flood for that. And we have lots of just miscellaneous, very nice photographs of old wagons and everything else. So a little bit about how we deliver the service. We have 3 physical centres, one at Acton. Thank you very much indeed to the Transport Museum, who give us space there for our London area archive material and publicity. In Droitwich, where I'm sitting at the moment, we keep our archival material, and in Walsall, we keep publicity and personal collections. We do a little bit of limited digitisation, photographs I've talked about, and we're also digitising something called notices and proceedings that I'll explain a little bit about in a moment. We have our website with an online catalogue, which is searchable. We do social media through Facebook, and we have a quarterly newsletter. This is our website, or rather a screen grab from it this morning. The sharp-eyed amongst you will see that we had intended to reopen on the 22nd of June, but that's now been cancelled due to us not being able to maintain social distancing within buildings when we have visitors and volunteers here. So this is basically our main online presence. Please go and have a look and tell us what you think. There is a search facility. We're at the moment, as you saw, actually cataloguing just on spreadsheets, and at some stage we need to go onto a collections management system proper, because we have, as I said, about 55,000 items. And what we do is we have a spreadsheet. I'm probably giving away far too many of our dark secrets here. We have a spreadsheet for each collection, and then once a quarter we bring them all together, and that's the basis of our online catalogue. So we need to be a lot more sophisticated. But to give you an example, today I put in a search for City of Oxford on records, and that returned 2,452 results. And that's the first 5. If you want to have all of them displayed at once, you can do. And we're just about to introduce a facility where you can actually download those on a CSV file if you want to keep those results. This is our Facebook presence. We post at the moment 3 times a week. We post an item of publicity, and we post something from our archive collections, and we post a photograph. And of course, we always get the biggest hits from the photograph of an old bus. But we have something like 4,400 followers at the moment, which we're quite pleased with. And social media is much maligned, but it's done fantastic things for us. On the left there, it's actually brought together colleagues who haven't seen each other for 30 years. So we put this photograph up, and somebody said, oh, I used to work there. And said, oh, is that Jeff the Fitter? If it is, how the hell are you? Yes, it is Jeff the Fitter. And it's just bringing people together. That's a very nice touch. On the right, we put up a brochure from a manufacturer called Guy that was run by a chap called Sydney Guy, and pinged up, we had the granddaughter of Sydney Guy, and she's actually given us quite a lot of archive material just on the basis of that pinging up on Facebook. So that's been really good. As I said, a quarterly newsletter. Our latest one is just about to go out at the end of this week. It's interesting that a lot of the content is now being sort of sacrificed to Facebook, really. So the newsletter has become much more of something for people who aren't on Facebook. Although it is taken by about 800 people. It's predominantly an emailed publication, and that's really where we started with sort of 5 people who would take the newsletter, and now we're up to 700 people really just on recommendations. So that's gone really well. The future. One of the things we've happened upon is these Caesar overhead scanners. We looked 5 years ago at investing in an overhead scanner, and it was about £7,000. And we can buy these now for less than £300. And these are absolutely fantastic bits of kit, to the extent that we're now scanning, as I mentioned before, notices and proceedings. These have been going since 1931 and still going today. And these are published fortnightly by the traffic commissioners in different traffic areas. And basically, if a bus company ever wanted to change a route, it had to be published in notices and proceedings. And so these are our #1 requested items at our centres. So what we are doing now with remote volunteers and duplicate copies is actually we have started to scan all 22,000 copies of these, and we're about 15% of the way through. We started with the 1930s, and we're well on with that, and we're probably at 1939, and we'll jump forward to 1986, which was the deregulation of the bus industry, and that's the next sort of period of interest. But again, that's something that we can give a remote volunteer to do. The #1 comment we get from people is, oh, I wish I lived near one of your centres because I would volunteer. So now we batch them off with either some photographs or an overhead scanner and say, right, this is what we want you to do now. I also mentioned earlier about bus companies now not issuing hard copy timetables. And again, some of our remote volunteers basically are given responsibility for an area, and they watch out for PDF timetables that are being issued, and they capture them. And they go to one of our lead volunteers, and now he's working on a facility so that eventually you'll be able to go on our website and put in a service number for a particular county, and you'll get the whole history of that route, and you'll be able to click on a change date, and that will bring up the timetable for that. So again, that's a useful facility for enthusiasts. Something else for the future is that although we've got capacity of nearly 600 cubic meters, we've run out of space. And so we've just acquired a new building. Some benefactors have given us the funds for that as a bridging loan, interest-free for 5 years. But we have just launched a campaign to raise some funds for £300,000. So if you think what we're doing is worthwhile, folks, and you've got those white fivers under the bed, this is a very worthwhile cause. So there are different levels of becoming a friend of the archive, and that's going pretty well. We launched that about 3 weeks ago, and we've raised about £45,000 already. So that's going really well. A few things on a more light-hearted note, just to finish off. From Rawtenstall Corporation Motors, dear Mr. Chadwick, the answer to your questionnaire dated 5th instant is no. Thank you very much indeed. So a man of few words there in Rawtenstall. We didn't keep this book, The Romance of the Civil Service. It just, you know, I don't think Jennifer Aniston would be interested in a rom-com based around that one. I don't know if you can see all of this, but it's a dead parrot story. It is someone complaining that they bought a parrot and it was quite all right up to Sunday last, and it gave up whistling altogether. It chirped a little yesterday and it died this morning. So whether that's a Norwegian blue or not, I don't know, but somebody felt sufficiently strongly to complain about it. Fresh from one of our bus operator photo albums, this would you believe is a social event where everyone's enjoying themselves. But the good thing is we know who all these people are, so that's a little bit of social history. I'm sure quite a lot of us have wanted to put that up in the bus industry. The fitters having refused to prepare the cars, there can be no service today. Thank you very much indeed, the General Manager. So just to summarise, because I'm nearly at the end of my promised hour. So we're really 3 years into this. So the challenges were playing 25 plus years of catch up on cataloguing about boxing up. We had a very, very large collection that we inherited. So that was in many respects a very good thing, but also a very big challenge. We've had to rely very squarely on volunteer labour, but that's going pretty well. Space really is the final frontier for us, but we've now acquired the building, so that's less of a challenge these days. But we think we've achieved quite a bit. We've established our identity, we've stabilised our funding. Our running costs are about £100,000 a year. Our Friends scheme gives us about £50,000, and our surplus, our sale of surplus material, as I've said, gets us about 80,000. So we're actually funding ourselves on an ongoing basis. We think we've raised awareness of archives actually in the bus enthusiast movement. A lot of enthusiast clubs and preservation society have always had an archive, but I think what we've done is alerted them to the fact that they could be treating them in a far more sympathetic way. So, you know, as I said, we buy low acid boxes in batches of 700. And what we do is actually offer those at the discounted price to enthusiast groups to actually contain their own archives. And there's been quite a strong take-up of that. And we built strong partnerships, and I would hope that we can continue to do that. And by me boring you to death for an hour, that we've been able to actually do that. So there we are. I've taken you on a bit of a journey. So we're at our terminus now. There we are. If you do want to get in touch, that's my email address, and that's our web address. I'll be delighted to hear from you. And I think that's about all I have to say at the moment. So thank you very much for your patience.